The economic apocalypse. Let's imagine markets have collapsed, money has no value, nothing's for sale, and no one's for hire, not even you. What will be your next steps? Will you rush to stockpile canned foods and guns to defend an isolated fort? Or will you reach out to your neighbors, see what they need, share what you have, and communally create a plan for survival? I've spent the last 6 years in communication researching how people create economic arrangements through their interactions with others. And I've seen that when we face desperate circumstances, be it poverty or natural disasters, we consistently turn to relationships and embracing our neighbors rather than hurting others or isolating ourselves. But at one time, I feared an imminent market collapse, or that our habits of putting money first were sacrificing other important values, like those of people, nature, community, and democracy. So as a researcher, I needed to know, how do people cope when they don't have money? I took this question to a day center for people experiencing homelessness in North Carolina. That's gritty community number 1. They taught me that in their presence, I felt more deeply accepted than I did in any other community I've ever been a part of. It was therapeutic to be with them because they didn't care if I graduated my then master's program, now PhD program, or what my hair looked like, or if I ever got my life together. All they cared about was that they could trust me, and that felt really liberating. Eventually, I came to see that they survived through a relationship-based economy. With some of them surviving on less than $20 a month, they distributed resources and value based on relationships instead of money. So where you and I labor for money, they labored for relationships. And similar to professionalism in the middle class, trust was an essential quality for success in their economy. Without it, they couldn't secure deep, interdependent relationships they needed. And similar to knowing people with job connections is a middle-class resource, one of their most valuable resources was redemption. Feeling forgiven for personal failures, relational wrongs, sometimes crimes, and always social stigma allowed them to regain the confidence they needed in order to care for themselves and others. When you and I hurt other people, it rarely prevents us from getting to school, in my case, going to work, eating our food, but because their livelihoods come from others' care, it's imperative that they feel deserving of relationships in order to survive. And while in the middle and upper class, we might measure status by fancy cars or fancy jobs, they measured status by how well they were able to care for those in need. 2 of my friends at the day center were a mom, probably in her 40s, and a son who was about my age, and they were seen everywhere together. When one was given housing and the other wasn't, they chose to stay on the streets because being together was more important than finding housing. And when I asked the son what gave his life meaning, his eyes lit up and he said, "It's the ability to be there to cheer up my mom when she's down." And I saw so many other guests' eyes light up when they described similar stories of how they were able to be there for friends in need. So one of the sacred secrets that this community taught me was that without money, they not only found meaning and livelihoods, they were also able to uphold unique values. In fact, the values they upheld were opposite from money-based economies. Instead of individualism and competition, theirs promoted community and intrinsic human value. While this is only one community, we can see this pattern in many others, including one that's really close to home for me, gritty community number 2. You see, my older brother was compelled by his values to not take part in a society he saw as unjust. So at age 18, he left home for communal living and then 8 years of hopping trains. Yes, that's 8 years of hopping trains. He was basically homeless. On the rails with no cell phone, little money, and few belongings, he developed family-like relationships with other train hoppers that were probably deeper than our families. I came to realize after researching at the day center that he chose this lifestyle not only for adventure because of his politics or to avoid a 9-to-5, he actually found it more fulfilling because it allowed him to put people above money. And I guess I think it's kind of ironic that it took me a master's degree to realize my brother had the answers I was looking for. Around the world, people who face poverty consistently turn to relationships. Now, there's case studies about this, but I've personally seen it in poor communities across Mexico that I studied with and visited, and in refugee and immigrant communities I served as an AmeriCorps Vista, and in hippie communes and anarchist collectives where I visited friends. I'm sure you've seen some communities like this too, maybe even on Pearl Street. Shout out to them, right? All these communities reveal an important pattern. It's kind of a really important pattern for this talk. The more we depend on money to survive, the less we depend on relationships, and vice versa. If we depend too much on money, what we get is social isolation. If we depend too much on relationships, what we get is codependency. And unfortunately, in the case of the day center community, this often left them vulnerable to abusive relationships. So it's imperative we have a balance, and it's really important that we have some of both. But this also means that we have economic choice beyond which car to buy or which job to take. We can choose our economies. And we might not always think this way, because many of us imagine the economy as being produced in Washington or on Wall Street, not on our streets. And that's because over 100 years ago, economics went from being a philosophy about how we use resources in our homes and communities to being about formulas and equations. It was made into a science because the public, people like us, were seen as too passionate and unpredictable to handle economic influence. So now, as a science, only elite economists are expected to tinker with it. But having researched the economy through the lens of communication, I know that our values, feelings, relationships, and norms profoundly influence our economies. And because we can choose our economies, we can actually choose to increase or expand relationship-based economies in our lives. We can spend more time with loved ones. We can live longer with our families, live communally with friends, push work aside to be present with those that we love. We can share our stuff, give gifts, volunteer, and commit unconditionally to a partner. When we do this, we not only will make ourselves happier, we will also protect ourselves from market fluctuations and put our economies where our values are. I hope it won't take an economic collapse to get us to think intentionally about how we use resources and build relationships. Let me ask you again. It's a market collapse. Money has no value. What will your next steps be? Thank you.